If a woman play dirty, do this. Stoicism. There will come a moment in almost every man's life when someone he trusted chooses to manipulate rather than communicate. She lies. She twists a conversation until you doubt your own memory. She uses your affection against you, testing how far she can push before you break. This video is not about hatred, and it is not about revenge. It is about something far more powerful, the ancient discipline of Stoicism, and how it teaches a man to remain unshaken, clear-headed, and dignified even when someone close to him chooses dishonesty over honesty. The Stoics were not soldiers avoiding pain. They were philosophers who understood that the only true battlefield is the mind. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while men schemed against him daily, and he wrote to himself, not for an audience, that the best response to betrayal was simply to become a better man, not a bitter one. That principle sits at the center of everything we will cover today. If manipulation, dishonesty, or emotional games have ever left you confused, angry, or hurt, this video will give you a framework, rooted in 2,000 years of philosophy, for handling it with strength instead of chaos. Before we begin, if this kind of grounded wisdom speaks to you, subscribe to this channel now. This is exactly the kind of content built here, and there is much more ahead. We will move through several Stoic principles, and along the way, I will tell you the story of a man named Kingsley, who learned these lessons the hard way, and came out the other side steadier than he had ever been. Stay with me until the end. Principle 1. Recognize the game without playing it. The first skill a Stoic man develops is recognition. He learns to see manipulation clearly, without pretending it is something else, and without immediately reacting to it. Manipulation often hides behind small inconsistencies, a story that shifts slightly each time it is told, a guilt trip disguised as concern, silence used as punishment rather than genuine need for space. A man who has not trained his awareness misses these patterns entirely, absorbing the confusion as though it were simply a misunderstanding. Epictetus taught that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. The first step, then, is not outrage. It is clarity. When something feels off in how a woman is communicating with you, resist the urge to immediately explain it away. Sit with the discomfort long enough to actually examine what is happening. Is this a genuine misunderstanding, or a pattern designed to keep you off balance? Recognizing the game does not mean becoming paranoid or suspicious of every partner you meet. Most people are not manipulative, and treating everyone as a potential threat poisons your ability to build real intimacy. But when the pattern is real, repeated dishonesty, deliberate confusion, testing behavior designed to provoke jealousy or anxiety, a Stoic man names it honestly to himself before deciding how to respond. This clarity is itself a form of power. The moment you can see a manipulation tactic for what it is, it loses much of its grip on you, because it can only work on a mind that has not yet recognized the pattern. Principle 2. Your reaction is the only thing you control. At the heart of Stoic philosophy sits the dichotomy of control, the idea that some things are within your power, and everything else is not. Her choices, her honesty, her intentions, her past, her decisions about how she treats you, none of these are within your control. Your response to all of it, entirely, is within your control. This is not a passive philosophy. It does not mean tolerating disrespect quietly. It means understanding that the only lever you can actually pull is your own behavior, your own composure, your own boundaries. When a man forgets this and tries to control her behavior instead, through arguments, ultimatums, jealousy, or manipulation of his own, he loses his footing entirely, because he is now fighting a battle he was never equipped to win. A grounded man, instead, directs all his energy toward what he can actually influence. He controls whether he stays calm. He controls whether he sets a clear boundary. He controls whether he chooses to walk away or stay and address the issue directly. He controls his own honesty, even when hers is in question. This shift, from trying to control her to mastering himself, is the single most important pivot in this entire video. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly about this exact discipline, reminding himself, day after day, that other people's actions were not his to command, only his own mind was truly his. That reminder, repeated daily, is what allowed him to remain steady while surrounded by dishonesty at every level of his court. Principle 3. Do not seek revenge, seek improvement. There is a particular temptation, when someone has wronged you, to want to hurt them back, to expose them, to manipulate them the way they manipulated you, to make them feel a fraction of what you felt. This instinct is human, and understandable, but Stoicism is unambiguous about where it leads. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is to not become like the person who wronged you. This single idea has guided countless men through betrayal without letting that betrayal corrode their own character. When you lower yourself to manipulation, deceit, or cruelty in response to someone else's dishonesty, you have not won anything. You have simply become a second version of the same behavior you were hurt by. This does not mean staying silent or accepting mistreatment. It means channeling the energy of that hurt somewhere useful instead of somewhere destructive. Instead of plotting how to make her feel what you felt, a Stoic man asks what this experience is teaching him about his own boundaries, his own judgment, his own growth. He uses the pain as fuel for becoming sharper, calmer, and wiser, rather than fuel for a cycle of retaliation that leaves both people worse off. This is often the hardest principle to practice, because revenge feels satisfying in the short term. But satisfaction and peace are different things, and a man who chooses improvement over revenge is the one who walks away with his dignity fully intact, while the other path leaves him tangled in the very drama he was trying to escape. If this is landing for you, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. This series exists to help men build exactly this kind of composure and clarity, and there is a great deal more coming. Principle 4. Set the boundary once, calmly, and mean it. A Stoic man does not tolerate dishonesty indefinitely in the name of peace. Boundaries are not the opposite of calmness, they are an expression of it. When a woman lies, manipulates, or plays games designed to confuse or control him, he addresses it directly, without shouting, without accusations flying in every direction, and without repeating himself 5 times hoping it eventually sinks in. The boundary is simple and clear. I need honesty from you. If that's not something you can offer, this isn't going to work. Said once, calmly, and followed by consistent action, this kind of boundary carries far more weight than an emotional outburst ever could. Outbursts get dismissed as overreactions. Calm, repeated consistency cannot be dismissed so easily, because it demonstrates that the man means exactly what he says. The mistake many men make is setting a boundary and then failing to enforce it, allowing the same behavior to continue while their words lose all meaning. A boundary without consequence is simply a suggestion, and manipulative behavior, left unconsequenced, tends to escalate rather than improve. If the dishonesty continues after a clear boundary has been set, the Stoic response is not another argument. It is action, distancing, reduced investment, or in some cases, walking away entirely. This is not cruelty. It is self-respect translated into behavior. A man who sets boundaries calmly and enforces them consistently teaches everyone around him, not just this one woman, exactly how he expects to be treated, and people generally rise or fall to meet that standard over time. Principle 5. Do not explain yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from trying to reason with someone who has already decided on a version of events that suits their narrative rather than the truth. A Stoic man learns, often the hard way, that some situations cannot be resolved through more explanation, more evidence, or more patient clarification. If a woman is playing games, twisting your words, accusing you of things you did not do, using confusion as a tool to keep you anxious and reactive, endless explanation often feeds the game rather than ending it. Each explanation gives her more material to twist, more opportunity to shift the goalposts, more engagement to feed whatever the underlying motive actually is. This is where Stoic restraint becomes essential. Say your piece once, clearly and honestly. If it is met with more manipulation rather than genuine listening, resist the urge to keep explaining. Silence, in this context, is not weakness. It is the refusal to keep participating in a conversation that was never designed to reach resolution in the first place. This principle requires real discipline, because the instinct to defend yourself against unfair accusations is powerful. But a man who has done his own inner work does not need everyone to understand him correctly in order to feel secure in who he is. He can let a misunderstanding stand, uncorrected, if correcting it would only invite further manipulation, trusting that his own conscience and his own consistent behavior are proof enough. Principle 6. Protect your peace like it is sacred. Peace of mind, to the Stoics, was not a luxury. It was the entire goal of philosophy. Every principle, every discipline, every daily practice existed in service of one outcome, a mind that remains calm and clear regardless of external chaos. When a man allows someone else's dishonesty to hijack his peace for days or weeks at a time, he has handed over the very thing philosophy exists to protect. This does not mean suppressing emotion or pretending hurt does not exist. It means refusing to let that hurt metastasize into obsession, refusing to spend every evening replaying conversations, refusing to let one person's behavior dictate the quality of his entire inner life. A Stoic man feels the sting of betrayal fully, processes it honestly, and then makes a deliberate decision not to let it consume him beyond what is useful or necessary. Practically, this might mean stepping away from constant communication with someone who has shown a pattern of dishonesty, giving your mind room to settle rather than staying entangled in a cycle of confusion and reaction. It might mean journaling through the anger rather than venting it endlessly to friends, which often reinforces the obsession rather than resolving it. It might simply mean returning to your work, your training, your goals, and refusing to let one relationship become the center around which your entire mental world revolves. Peace protected, this deliberately becomes a kind of quiet strength that other people can feel, even if they cannot explain exactly why you seem so unshaken by circumstances that would rattle most people. A short story, Kingsley. Let me tell you about a man named Kingsley. Several years ago, he was dating a woman named Chadinma, and for months, something felt slightly wrong, though he could never quite name it. Stories she told him would shift in small details each time. She would accuse him of things he had not done, then deny ever making the accusation days later. When he raised concerns, she turned the conversation around until somehow he was apologizing, though he could never trace exactly how the conversation had gotten there. Kingsley, at the time, did not have the language for what was happening. He simply felt confused, anxious, constantly walking on eggshells, trying to explain himself more and more, hoping that enough clarity from him would finally make things stable. It never did. The more he explained, the more material she seemed to have to twist against him. One night, after a particularly exhausting argument that left him apologizing for something he was fairly certain he had not actually done, Kingsley sat alone in his car outside his apartment and picked up a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius that a friend had given him months earlier and that he had never opened. He read a single passage about not needing to control what other people say or think, only how he chose to respond. Something in him went quiet for the first time in weeks. Over the following days, Kingsley stopped over-explaining. When Chadinma brought up another shifted version of events, he calmly stated what he remembered, once, and did not repeat himself 5 times trying to convince her. When she used silence to punish him, he did not chase her with anxious messages. He simply continued his life, his work, his gym routine, his time with friends, giving her the space to either return to honest communication or reveal, through her continued behavior, that honest communication was never really the goal. Within a few weeks, the pattern became undeniable, no longer hidden behind Kingsley's own confusion and self-doubt. He set a clear boundary. Once, calmly. He needed honesty, and without it, the relationship could not continue. When the same behavior resumed almost immediately, he did not argue. He simply ended things, without cruelty, without a dramatic final confrontation, and without needing her to admit wrongdoing before he could move forward. What Kingsley remembers most from that period was not the relationship itself, but the quiet strength he built while working his way through it. He did not become bitter. He did not swear off relationships entirely or become suspicious of every woman he met afterward. He simply became more discerning, more grounded, and far less willing to abandon his own peace of mind in the name of keeping someone else comfortable. Years later, in a healthier relationship, he still credits that difficult season, and that one dog-eared book, with teaching him the composure that now defines how he shows up in every important relationship in his life. Principle 7. Judge the pattern, not the single mistake. Stoicism teaches discernment, and discernment requires distinguishing between an isolated human error and a genuine pattern of manipulation. Everyone lies occasionally, out of embarrassment, fear, or simple human weakness. A single inconsistency does not automatically mean a woman is playing dirty in some calculated way. A Stoic man is careful not to overreact to isolated incidents as though they were evidence of a grand scheme. What matters is the pattern over time. Does the dishonesty repeat, despite being addressed directly? Does the confusion always seem to leave you doubting yourself rather than resolving the actual issue? Does accountability consistently land on your shoulders regardless of what actually happened? These repeated patterns, not single moments of human error, are what deserve serious attention and clear boundaries. This distinction matters because a man who treats every small mistake as manipulation becomes exhausting to be in a relationship with, poisoning good faith connections with suspicion they do not deserve. Wisdom, in the Stoic sense, is precisely this ability to tell the difference, to extend grace where grace is warranted, and to hold firm boundaries where a genuine pattern has revealed itself clearly. Give honest mistakes room to be honest mistakes. Reserve your firmest boundaries for patterns that repeat despite clear communication. This discernment is what separates wisdom from either naivety on one side or paranoia on the other. Quick reminder, if this kind of grounded, practical philosophy is helping you, subscribe to the channel now. It helps this message reach more men who need exactly this kind of clarity. Principle 8. Let her see the real you, not a reactive version. One of the most damaging effects of manipulation is how it can slowly transform a calm man into a reactive, anxious version of himself, constantly on edge, constantly defending, constantly reacting to the last provocation. Over time, this reactive version becomes the only self she ever sees, and the man barely recognizes himself in the mirror anymore. A Stoic man works actively to prevent this transformation. He recognizes when his responses are being shaped entirely by someone else's behavior, rather than by his own values, and he consciously returns to who he actually is beneath the reactivity. This might mean taking a full day before responding to something upsetting, rather than firing back the anxious message his emotions want to send immediately. This is not about suppressing genuine feelings. It is about ensuring that the version of you present in the relationship is the version built through deliberate character, not the version manufactured by someone else's manipulation. A calm response, chosen deliberately after reflection, protects your identity from being slowly rewritten by someone else's chaos. Practicing this consistently, over time, becomes a kind of armor. The more a man returns to his true, grounded self after every provocation, the harder it becomes for manipulation to have any lasting effect on him, because his sense of identity is no longer up for negotiation based on someone else's tactics. Principle 9. Walking away is sometimes the most stoic act available. There is a common misconception that Stoicism is about endurance at all costs, that a truly disciplined man simply tolerates whatever comes his way without ever removing himself from a difficult situation. This misunderstands the philosophy entirely. The Stoics valued wisdom above endurance, and wisdom sometimes concludes that the correct action is to leave. If a pattern of dishonesty has been clearly identified, if boundaries have been set calmly and repeatedly ignored, if your peace of mind continues to be sacrificed for a relationship that shows no sign of honest correction, walking away is not weakness. It is the clearest expression of self-respect a man can offer himself in that moment. This is often harder than staying, because staying, even in a painful situation, can feel familiar and safe compared to the uncertainty of starting over. But a Stoic man understands that comfort and virtue are not the same thing, and that enduring dysfunction indefinitely, out of fear of the unknown, is not strength, it is simply a different kind of avoidance. Leaving well matters too. A Stoic man does not need a dramatic exit, does not need to win a final argument, does not need her to admit fault before he allows himself to go. He simply, calmly, removes himself from a situation that has repeatedly shown him what it is, trusting his own judgment over any last-minute promises of change that history has already suggested will not hold. Principle 10. Do not confuse forgiveness with reopening the door. Stoicism places heavy value on freedom from resentment, because carrying bitterness for years does more damage to the man carrying it than it ever does to the person who caused the original hurt. A Stoic man works toward genuine forgiveness, releasing the grip that anger holds over his own mind, so he can move forward clear-eyed rather than dragging old wounds into every future relationship. But forgiveness, in the Stoic sense, is an internal release, not an automatic reopening of trust. A man can forgive a woman for lying to him, wish her well, and release his resentment entirely, while still choosing not to let her back into his life if the pattern of dishonesty was severe or repeated. These two things are often confused, especially by men who feel that true forgiveness requires reconciliation, when in fact the two are entirely separate decisions. Releasing resentment protects your own peace. Reopening trust is a separate judgment, based on evidence of genuine change over time, not on promises alone. A Stoic man can hold both truths simultaneously, genuine goodwill toward someone who hurt him, and a clear-eyed refusal to place himself back in a position where the same pattern can repeat. This distinction protects men from two common traps: the trap of endless bitterness that poisons future relationships, and the trap of premature reconciliation driven by loneliness rather than genuine evidence of change. Forgive freely, for your own sake. Rebuild trust slowly, if at all, and only in response to sustained, demonstrated honesty. Principle 11. Guard your reputation by refusing to air every grievance publicly. When a man has been wronged, there is often a strong pull to tell everyone, Friends, social media, anyone who will listen. Exactly what she did, seeking validation and sympathy from an audience. A Stoic man resists this pull, not because the hurt is not real, but because broadcasting private grievances rarely brings the peace it promises, and often causes further damage to his own standing. Seneca wrote extensively about guarding one's own tranquility from the opinions and reactions of a crowd. Public airing of grievances invites an audience into a situation that was never theirs to weigh in on, and it often escalates conflict rather than resolving it. It also reveals more about the man's own emotional state than it does about the woman's behavior, signaling to anyone watching that he has not yet processed what happened privately and with composure. This does not mean total silence with everyone. A close friend, a mentor, a therapist, these are appropriate places to process pain honestly. The distinction is between private processing with people who genuinely have your well-being at heart, and public performance designed to gather sympathy or damage someone else's reputation in front of an audience. A man who handles betrayal with quiet dignity, rather than public spectacle, tends to earn far more genuine respect over time than one who turns every hurt into a public campaign. His composure speaks louder than any accusation ever could, and it protects his own reputation as someone who handles conflict with maturity rather than drama. Principle 12. Remember that character is built in exactly these moments. It is easy to talk about Stoic composure in the abstract, sitting comfortably, reading philosophy with no immediate pressure testing your resolve. The real test arrives only when someone you care about chooses dishonesty, and your emotions are screaming at you to react, to retaliate, to prove a point. Character is not built in comfortable moments. It is built and revealed precisely in these difficult ones. Every time a man chooses calm over chaos, boundaries over bitterness, and improvement over revenge, he is not simply managing a single difficult relationship. He is training the exact muscle that will define how he handles every future conflict, every future disappointment, every future betrayal that life inevitably brings his way. This training compounds, the same way physical strength compounds through repeated effort over time. This is why the Stoics treated daily adversity not as an unfortunate interruption to a peaceful life, but as the actual curriculum of a meaningful one. Marcus Aurelius did not wish for an empire free of scheming and betrayal. He simply trained himself, through repeated practice, to remain steady regardless of what surrounded him. That training is available to any man willing to do the work, one difficult moment at a time. If a woman has played dirty with you, resist the temptation to see this only as a wound. See it also as an opportunity, uncomfortable, unwanted, but real, to practice exactly the kind of composure that will define you as a man for decades to come, in relationships far beyond this particular one. Principle 13. Do not let one woman's dishonesty rewrite your view of all women. There is a dangerous shortcut the mind takes after betrayal, a tendency to generalize one painful experience into a sweeping conclusion about an entire group of people. A man who has been lied to by one woman sometimes concludes, quietly and without fully realizing it, that women in general cannot be trusted. This generalization feels protective in the moment, but it quietly poisons every future relationship before it has a chance to begin. Stoic philosophy places enormous value on accurate judgment, on seeing reality as it actually is rather than through the distorted lens of recent pain. A single person's dishonesty is information about that person, and about the specific dynamic you shared with her. It is not reliable evidence about an entire gender, and treating it as such leads a man toward a guarded, suspicious version of himself that struggles to build genuine intimacy with anyone new. This distinction matters enormously for how a man shows up going forward. A man who correctly attributes past hurt to a specific person, rather than to an entire category of people, remains open to genuine connection while still carrying the wisdom and discernment that experience has taught him. A man who overgeneralizes becomes closed off, defensive, and often projects suspicion onto people who have done nothing to earn it. Healthy discernment looks like this: carry the lessons, release the generalization. Notice red flags more clearly next time, without assuming every future partner is destined to repeat the exact pattern of the last one. This balance, difficult as it is what allows a man to become wiser without becoming bitter, and it is entirely consistent with the deeper Stoic commitment to seeing the world clearly rather than through the fog of unresolved pain. Principle 14. Use solitude to recalibrate before making any big decision. In the immediate aftermath of discovering dishonesty or manipulation, emotions run at their highest intensity, and this is exactly the moment when major decisions feel most urgent and are, paradoxically, least reliable. A Stoic man builds the discipline to slow down here, using solitude deliberately to let the initial emotional storm pass before deciding anything permanent. This might mean waiting a full day before sending a message you were tempted to send in anger. It might mean taking a long walk alone rather than immediately calling a friend to rehash every detail while your nervous system is still flooded. Solitude, used this way, is not avoidance. It is a deliberate pause that allows the rational mind, rather than the wounded emotional mind, to eventually take the lead in deciding what happens next. The Stoics practiced regular periods of quiet reflection precisely because they understood how easily judgment becomes clouded by intense emotion. Seneca wrote about retreating into himself at the end of each day, reviewing his own actions honestly, away from the noise and reactivity of the world around him. This same discipline, applied to a moment of betrayal, gives a man the space to respond from his values rather than from his wounds. When the moment eventually comes to communicate your boundary, end the relationship, or decide how to move forward, let that decision come from the calm version of yourself that solitude helped you access, not from the version still reeling in the first raw hours after discovering the truth. Principle 15. Let your standards speak louder than any argument ever could. A man who has clear personal standards rarely needs to argue his way through manipulation, because his standards do the talking for him. If honesty is non-negotiable for him, that standard, held consistently over time, becomes obvious to anyone around him, without him needing to constantly announce it or defend it in the middle of every disagreement. Standards, lived out quietly and consistently, communicate more than any heated conversation ever could. This is why the earlier principles all point toward the same underlying discipline, building a version of yourself so grounded, so consistent, and so clear about what you will and will not accept, that manipulation simply has less room to operate. A man without clear standards is easy to confuse, because there is no fixed reference point for him to return to. A man with clear, lived standards has an anchor, and that anchor makes him remarkably difficult to destabilize. Building these standards is not a single decision made once. It is a daily practice, deciding, again and again, what kind of treatment you will accept, what kind of honesty you require, and what kind of behavior signals it is time to walk away. Each time you honor that standard, even when it costs you something in the moment, you reinforce a version of yourself that is harder and harder to manipulate over time. This is ultimately what separates a man who survives dishonesty bitter and guarded from a man who moves through it and becomes genuinely stronger. The difference is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of standards, held consistently, that guide his response long after the initial hurt has faded. Principle 16. Rebuild trust in yourself before you rebuild trust in anyone else. After betrayal, the deepest damage is often not the loss of trust in the other person, but the quiet erosion of trust in your own judgment. A man starts to wonder how he missed the signs, why he did not see it sooner, whether he can rely on his own perception in future relationships at all. This self-doubt, left unaddressed, does more long-term damage than the original betrayal itself. A Stoic man treats this rebuilding as essential work, separate from and prior to any new relationship. He reflects honestly on what happened, without excessive self-blame, extracting real lessons about the early signs he can watch for next time, while also recognizing that manipulation, by its very design, is often difficult to detect even for careful, intelligent people. Self-compassion here is not weakness. It is accuracy, because manipulation is designed specifically to evade detection. This rebuilding might look like journaling honestly about what happened, discussing it with a trusted mentor or therapist who can offer perspective without judgment, or simply giving yourself permission to trust your own future judgment again, gradually, through small decisions rather than one dramatic leap of faith. A man who skips this step often carries unprocessed suspicion into his next relationship, projecting old fears onto a new person who may not deserve them at all. Trust in yourself, rebuilt deliberately, becomes the foundation for every healthy relationship that follows. It is not glamorous work, and it rarely gets discussed as openly as the more visible principles of boundaries and composure, but it may be the most important work of all, because a man who trusts his own judgment again is finally free to move forward without the shadow of the past distorting everything new. Bringing it together, every principle in this video traces back to the same Stoic foundation, the understanding that your character is the one thing that remains entirely within your control, regardless of what anyone else chooses to do. Dishonesty, manipulation, and games from someone you cared about will always sting. That sting is human, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest in its own right. But how you respond to that sting is where your true strength gets built or eroded. The man who reacts with revenge, Chaos, or matching manipulation loses far more than the relationship itself. He loses a piece of his own integrity in the process, trading his character for a temporary satisfaction that never actually resolves anything. The man who responds with clarity, calm boundaries, and self-respect walks away, whatever the outcome, with something far more valuable than being right. He walks away with himself intact. Kingsley's story is proof that this composure can be built, even by a man who starts out confused, anxious, and unsure of himself. It does not require perfection. It requires practice, patience with your own progress, and a willingness to return, again and again, to the question the Stoics ask themselves daily: what is actually within my control right now, and how do I want to show up regardless of what anyone else does? If someone has played dirty with you, do not let it turn you bitter, suspicious of everyone, or eager for revenge. Let it sharpen you instead. Let it teach you your own boundaries more clearly. Let it become one more piece of evidence that you can remain steady, dignified, and calm, even when someone close to you chooses dishonesty over truth. Before you go, if this video gave you something useful, subscribe to this channel. This is exactly the kind of grounded, practical philosophy built here every week, and I would love to have you along for what comes next. Keep becoming.